Okay, so we talked about all of these awesome straight ahead jazz records from the 1980s. Another very big part of my musical upbringing in the 80s was fusion music. And jazz rock, fusion, whatever you want to call it, evolved since it was, since it kind of started in the late 60s. And by the 80s, it was sort of a whole different thing. And a lot of people really rag on some of this music, which I think is, I don't know, there's all sorts of reasons why people do that. And I don't want to get into it, but I just don't care. And I want to tell you about records that I think are great and that I think are still great and that I still listen to. And, at the very least, every one of these has some really fierce drumming on it. And I guarantee you, probably the people that are criticizing the drumming on these records cannot play like this. Maybe we should leave that part out, but...
No, we're not leaving that part out. That's staying in.
So, one of the first... I think my first real entry into fusion was Billy Cobham. Unfortunately, I don't have any of Billy Cobham's 80s records, and I used to, and I don't have them anymore, and I'm sad, actually, and I need to find them again. There's a great one called Warning. Did a couple on GRP that were really nice, and there were a couple on Elektra Musician. There was one called Glass Menagerie that I used to really like. But the next drummer that I got into, I remember my drum teacher at the time, Jan Fung, who I was studying with in middle school, around 1986, so I would have been like, I don't know, 13 or something, brought in the first Chick Corea Electric Band record. And I'd only heard of Dave Weckl from, he had been in Modern Drummer around that time. And my teacher, Mr. Fung, brought in a cassette tape of this record. And it completely changed my life. And completely just, I never heard drumming like this, particularly on the tune Gotta Match. Never heard anything like that. It is phenomenal drumming. Great feel, incredible ideas.
Great sound.
Great sound, yeah. And I still love this music. I think it's really, really great. I think some people will kind of make fun of it because some of Chick's keyboard sounds now sound a little dated, although a lot of the 80s sounds have kind of come back as far as pop music goes.
I think his synths sound great on that record.
I do too.
Yeah.
I think, and this was all brand new. These were brand new sounds. It was all brand new textures, and Chick was into experimenting and trying something new, and that's what he was doing with this stuff. And, I think that's great. I think that's a great approach. So, anyway, I still love these records. I think the grooves on these records is the next one, Light Years.
Dave Weckl.
Dave Weckl is on all of these. I think the feels, the grooves, the ideas, everything is just slamming on these records. I really love them, and it's fun to have them on LP too. And these are all on GRP. These are all recorded by Bernie Kirsch. They're all recorded at Chick's studio, Mad Hatter Studios, and they sound phenomenal. Each of them sounds different. They each have their own sound, but they all sound really, really great. And then, of course, the acoustic band record. This is the first acoustic band record, and this was really influential to me. The other ones are fusion records with some moments of straight ahead playing, but this is all straight ahead playing, and this really got me on the path to being a straight ahead jazz drummer.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, absolutely. This was a very important early influence for me as far as getting me into wanting to play swing. Roy on Now He Sings, Now He Sobs as well, and Steve Gadd on some of Chick's 70s records, but this was definitely up there for me. So while we're talking about Weckl, though, I wanted to show you a few pretty obscure records. This is one of his earliest recordings, not his first or anything like that, but he'd been in New York a few years. This is Bill Connors, who is a guitar player who played in an early version of Return to Forever, did a bunch of cool records on ECM, but then had this trio which with Tom Kennedy on bass, and initially Dave Weckl was on drums. When Dave went to join Chick Corea, a drummer named Kim Plainfield took over, who's a great drummer. But this is a really great early Weckl performance from 1984, and you hear a lot of his ideas. He was 24 when he recorded this. Dave was born in 1960, so it's easy to figure out how old he was whenever he recorded any
thought
record.
he was younger than that. Wow.
Yeah, no, 24 when he did this. And
That's a great record.
It's just so advanced. I mean, just everything, he can play. Like, time is perfect, grooves are all solid, but, coming up with great ideas, but he has his own language at this point, too.
Very compositional, yeah.
Yeah, and he has his own way of doing things already at this point. It's really unbelievable to hear somebody... Tony was like that too, even at a younger age, like with his own style and his own approach. Another early record, and this was one of Weckl's first sort of big gigs, this band called French Toast, which was led by a guy named Peter Gordon, who was a French horn player, which is why it's called French Toast. But the rhythm section in this band was Michel Camilo and Anthony Jackson. And apparently Erskine had been doing this gig, but he was getting too busy, and Erskine knew Weckl and knew he could play. He'd heard him play and recommended Weckl to join this band to do some gigs with them. And when he did this gig and he met Anthony Jackson, Anthony recommended him for an upcoming Simon and Garfunkel tour and all this stuff that kind of led. And this eventually turned into the Michel Camilo group.
Right, I have that record with a different cover.
Yeah, this is a Japanese pressing. This is actually on King Records.
Wow.
Which we know from our Blue Note reissues from the 70s.
Wow.
Yeah, this was I think this was released a few different ways, maybe. But this is, I got this in a random record store in Gowanus that doesn't exist anymore. And this I got at Academy. This is, I think, on the same label. I think these are on King. Yeah, this is on Electric Bird, which was a Japanese label. Mm-hmm. So this is a similar band, same rhythm section, and also with is Lou Soloff is on both of these. So this was the first Michel Camilo. I think maybe Michel Camilo's first record as a band leader, and Weckl is on this. These are both pre-Electric Band basically, and really great Weckl performances. Again, like super solid groove, everything's in the pocket, but really creative ideas, creative voice. So one of my sort of prized possessions as far as obscure records, and this isn't a particularly obscure record, but I only recently found out that this exists on vinyl. So this is under Steve Kahn's name, Steve Kahn Public Access, but what this really is a group called Eyewitness, which was basically a collective group that was Steve Kahn, Anthony Jackson, Steve Jordan initially on drums, and Manolo Badrina on percussion. And they did 3 records, which I'll get to in a second. And then they kind of disbanded, and they did a reunion with Weckl on drums, and they made this record, Public Access, which is a really burning record. And this is 10 years, well, not 10 years later, this is 89, so
wow.
It's Weckl at this point is already a drumming superstar.
Yeah.
And already, legendary for his voice, his ideas, his language.
And his leather slippers that he played in.
I think those were basically like dance shoes.
Right. Yeah.
Leather. The soles were leather. So speaking of that band, Eyewitness, we can move on to Steve Jordan. And this is the first Eyewitness record. And again, it's sort of under Steve Kahn's leadership, or it's his name, but I do think this was a pretty collective band. They did 3 records. The first one, Eyewitness, Blades, and Casa Loco. And these are all on different labels. Antilles label, but this one is on Passport Jazz, which is kind of, I think they were sort of maybe the same label. I'm not really sure. Different distributors. These are such good records, especially the first one. Oh my God, Jordan's playing on this is so amazing, and the grooves are just otherworldly, and his ideas, and it's more, it's fusion, I guess, but it's more fusion-y than we think of Steve Jordan. We think of Steve Jordan now as the guy that is touring with the Rolling Stones.
Different guy now entirely.
Yeah, and an amazing producer and rock drummer, but
I think he disowns a lot of that drumming now.
Well, that's sad because this is
Right.
These records are really wonderful. Great writing and super cool playing. I mean, he's obviously entitled to feel however he wants about whatever he has done, but I really love these records, and I know that
he was he was the most soulful fusion drummer who ever lived.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I hear in these records, I hear a lot of things that influence Weckl. I hear some Weckl coming out of these. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also Peter Erskine. I think Erskine was influenced by this stuff too. I think that, and we're actually going to get to Peter next. There's a lineage of Jordan and Erskine, and also Steve Gadd being really influential to Weckl, and thus sort of the greater.
I always thought Gadd. I don't think in Erskine, I guess, a little bit, but I hadn't thought about Jordan.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I think that some of these records that we're going to talk about with Peter, particularly the Steps Ahead record, the first Steps Ahead record.
Well, that's a masterpiece.
It is a masterpiece,
Really
and this is a masterpiece for everybody involved. Brecker,
Gomez,
Ileana Elias is brilliant on this. Brilliant writing.
Another James Farber record.
Oh, is it? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Yeah, Power Station.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
What a record.
This one too, Power Station, James Farber. Oh, no, sorry, Skyline, James Farber. So this one in particular, because this is a very acoustic record, to me, I hear a lot of Weckl in Peter. I hear Peter Erskine and Weckl's playing, I should say, especially early Weckl. There's something about the sound and the phrasing. As much as Weckl is obviously influenced by Steve Gadd, I hear him also being equally influenced by Peter Erskine. There's a certain phrasing and a looseness and a, I don't know, sort of a hipness to the phrasing that that I think Weckl may have gotten from Erskine. I mean, there's similarities, I think.
Yeah.
This record is more electronic. There's more sort of sequences and triggering and synths and things, but also really wonderful writing on this. And of course, all of this has great playing.
Does the second one have a title?
Yeah, Modern Times.
Modern Times.
Yeah,
right.
First one is just Steps Ahead.
Right.
Second one is Modern Times.
Right.
Steve Gadd was the original drummer in this band.
Right.
And then when he left, Erskine took it over. And related to that, well, sort of related, is this record by Don Grolnick. This is called Hearts and Numbers. And I know for a fact that Peter considers this one of the best records that he played on.
It's also got an incredible Steve Jordan track.
It does, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, so Erskine and Steve Jordan are both on this record. And
Man.
There's a tune on here called Human Bites where they actually play together. They play double drums, and it is fierce.
Huh, I
it
don't
is
remember that
so cool. Erskine's playing a little bebop kit with an 18-inch bass drum. You hear Jordan playing his kit with the smaller toms, and it's really, really cool. And Brecker solos over both of them playing together. Brecker plays
that reggae tune with Jordan. It is just
yeah. Pointing at the moon. Yeah.
Wow, what a song.
This is a really, really good record.
Yeah,
This came out on something called Hip Pocket Records. I love this trio, the John Abercrombie trio, with Marc Johnson and Peter Erskine. This is their first record as a trio called Current Events. This is on ECM. Probably also a Power Station and James Farber. No, this is Rainbow Studio in Oslo. They had a really cool way of playing together, and it's an interesting cross between an acoustic trio and an electric trio. So you have electric guitar, obviously, but John Abercrombie was also playing guitar synthesizer and also using a sequencer a little bit. There's a tune called Hippityville on this that I really love that has this little sequence, this little keyboard sort of backing track that repeats through the whole tune, sort of loops. Just a cute little chordal melody.
Yeah, all his synth stuff holds up really well, too.
It does, right?
It was just so great.
Yeah, it really does. And then Erskine is using, despite the synths and everything, he's using a little bebop kit with an 18-inch bass drum. It's a really cool juxtaposition of acoustic and electronic. And there's a tune here, too, the first tune, Clint, which has some hits and stuff. But Erskine just really slays.
That's his zenith, I think, as a drummer that period.
So good.
Man, this next record you're going to show.
Yeah.
It's a forgotten masterpiece. That thing should be like every jazz player's, that one and the other one. Bass Desires.
Bass Desires. This was a group that Marc Johnson led, the bassist. And it's interesting. Two guitars, Bill Frisell and John Scofield, with Peter Erskine on drums. and this was a very, very cool group. And it was effectively, I guess, under Mark Johnson's leadership.
Is that the first
one listed? Yeah, this is the first one. It's just called Bass Desires.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It is, right? And it's under his leadership, and everybody contributes tunes, and it does sort of sound more like a collective band. They did a second record called Second Sight that's also fantastic. And that one has, I think that has Sweet Soul, which is Peter's tune. Really lovely tune that Peter wrote called Sweet Soul. He later re-recorded it on his own album of the same name, but the first version, I have it here, is on the second Bass Desires record. Another obscure record with Peter that I love is Gary Peacock's record. I believe that's pronounced Guamba.
I've never seen that.
This is a cool one. This is a much more sort of ECM sounding record. These other ones, like the Abercrombie and Bass Desires, they sound like New York records. They sound like New York jazz on ECM, which is something that Manfred Eicher started doing, I guess, at a certain point. Like, there's stuff on ECM that sounds very ECM. Everything sounds ECM, but there's like stuff that's more European, I guess.
That's that engineer Koenigsborg, probably.
Yeah. The stuff recorded in Oslo is all him. And then there are other things that were recorded in New York with New York musicians that are a little bit more, I don't know, sound more like New York jazz. This was recorded in Oslo and sounds more like, I think because of the people involved, it's Palle Mikkelborg on trumpet and Jan Garbarek on saxophone with Gary Peacock and Peter Erskine. The thing that's kind of cool about this is that, so it's 1987, and there's actually some drum programming on this, believe it or not. I think Erskine brought a drum machine of some sort, some sort of sampling drum machine, and there's these neat little, it's not like something playing a beat, but these neat little sort of percussion sequences that happen throughout some of these tunes that the band plays with. And it's just really cool. It just adds a really neat texture to it.
Oh my God.
I think next we're going to talk
Here
about
it comes.
Vinnie Colaiuta. Vinnie, fellow Pittsburgh guy. Man, I mean, what can you say about Vinnie?
Yeah,
just one of the most talented musicians of all time, and just a complete virtuoso. And this record is just one of his greatest performances ever. And I'm a big fan of Allan Holdsworth, and all of his records are wonderful. All of them have great writing, but this one stands out a little bit because Vinnie is just playing his butt off on this. And I actually shouldn't overlook, because we're going to talk about him in a minute, but there is one tune that Chad Wackerman plays on, and he sounds fantastic on this too. Totally different, but also sounds great. But this is just an amazing vehicle for Vinnie to just be Vinnie, and just, I think he was given free rein to just play this stuff however you feel it, and he just, everybody just goes up a whole nother level.
Yeah, that whole record is just nuts.
And this is a pretty hard one to find on LP.
Oh,
I
is
don't
that
think
right?
I've seen it on, I think this is the only copy I've ever seen on LP.
Yeah, I have.
I'm also a big fan of, these are sort of seen as Electric Band offshoot records. When the Electric Band was successful on GRP, they started giving various members of the band record deals to do their own solo records. Eric Marienthal did a bunch, and Weckl did a few. John Patitucci's records, for me, are some of my favorites, and it just
a lot of different drummers on those records.
A lot of different drummers, but it all kind of is held together by John's unique and very strong individual voice on the bass, on upright and electric.
Totally.
Great writer, great producer. I think maybe Chick produced this first one. I'm not actually sure. This was produced by Chick, but they feel like John's records. They feel they have their own. They stand alone a little bit. They have their own vibe. They're not just like Electric Band's offshoots to me. They really stand on their own as great records. And Vinnie's on about half of this. Weckl's on a few great tracks. Peter Erskine plays his ass off on a tune called Searching Finding, which features Michael Brecker. But I put this in with Vinnie because Vinnie just, I mean, there's a bunch of tracks that he's on that are he just plays so well. There's a sort of Afro-Cuban groove tune called Bajo Bajo that he plays so great on it, man. And then this is really hard to find on LP. This is one I found in Denmark, and I've only seen one copy of this. But this is Patitucci's third record, also on GRP, called Sketchbook. And yeah, I mean, this is God, this might be a 90s record now that I think about it. It might not actually technically be in the 80s, but Vinnie is on, again, there's like a couple tracks with Erskine, there's some program drums, but Vinnie is on 4 tunes, I think, and I mean, there's 2 tunes where he plays really amazing Vinnie technical stuff. Spaceships and Scofield are just
right.
Like, I mean, they'll completely blow your mind. But there are 2 other tunes where he plays just grooves, where he's really, really funky and really grooving, I think, that I think are also just as good, and that I've listened to just as much. There's also a really great tune on here with Terry Lynn Carrington playing drums. Terry Lynn is another really
incredible talent,
incredible drummer, and really underrated.
Yeah.
What's the tune called? Train. Obviously a tribute to John Coltrane, and it's trio between Michael Brecker, John on upright bass, and Terry Lynn.
Wow.
And it's like a fast bebop kind of a burnout tune, Like
I wonder if she was with Wayne Shorter at that time.
Around that time, I think she was with him around 87,
right.
Maybe 87, 89, somewhere in there. So this is around that time, yeah. But she plays great on this.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah. And then this is a super obscure artist and record that you actually gave me this copy, Ken. So thank you, Ken.
That's a great record.
This is, it is, right? So this is an artist named Suzanne Dean, and I don't think she even plays on this. But she wrote all of these tunes. It's basically her record as a composer.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Called Dreams Come True. And Vinnie he's on everything on this, isn't he? I don't think
it's that track Rhythm River that's so unbelievable. Such a beautiful performance.
So John Patitucci's on some of it.
Huge pocket.
Jimmy Johnson is on some of it. Yeah, Bob Shepard plays, Brandon Fields. It's like LA All-Stars.
Right.
Vinnie sounds so good on this. And he does Vinnie stuff, but the pocket is so deep on this. And I think Vinnie is underrated as a pocket player. And this is, again, it's hard to find. I don't think that if you do find it, it probably won't go for a lot of money, just because it's so obscure that it's not one that's going to be on people's radars. But it's a really, really wonderful record and great writing. I think more people should know about Suzanne Dean.
And a cool cover, too, in its own weird, dreamlike way.
Yeah. We can't talk about fusion without talking about Steve Gadd, right? Steve Gadd is one of the most important drummers of all time. And as far as records that he recorded in the 80s, we could talk about, Grover Washington records or, things like that, Paul Simon records. But as far as stuff that's jazz or jazzier, one of the first ones that I really fell in love with is Chick Corea 3 Quartets, which features Michael Brecker and Eddie Gomez, along with Chick and Steve Gadd. And Steve there's a solo on the last tune that I think is one of Steve's best solos he ever recorded. It's on Quartet number 2, I believe.
Phenomenal.
It's just so good. And the sound of the drums. This is another one recorded at Mad Hatter with Bernie Kirsch, who I spoke about earlier. Amazing engineer. Always just got such a great sound out of everybody.
That's recently reissued, so easier to find.
Yeah, well, there's a CD that actually is expanded that has like 5 or 6 extra tracks, which is really, really great. The next one, this is a little bit more obscure. This is a Klaus Ogerman record called Cityscape, which is sort of built around featuring Michael Brecker. And this is actually orchestral. It's sort of like orchestral writing with Michael Brecker and Marcus Miller and Steve Gadd. It's mostly like an orchestral record with rhythm section and with Brecker just blowing on this stuff. But Brecker plays so incredibly beautifully. And Gadd is just super supportive, very minimal drumming, but it's beautiful writing. It's really breathtaking writing from Klaus Ogerman. I also wanted to talk about the Manhattan Jazz Quintet, which is a funny group that I think technically still exists. Is under the leadership of a pianist named David Matthews. Not Dave Matthews, the guitarist, singer-songwriter of the Dave Matthews Band, but David Matthews, who was a pianist and arranger and contractor in New York City. He was a big-time studio guy in the 70s and 80s. And I think now he lives in Japan. But he put together this group of sort of New York studio all-stars to play jazz tunes, basically, and record for a Japanese label. This is distributed by King, but I think this is on Electric Bird as well.
Maybe. He did records with Weckl as well.
That's right. Oh, Paddle Wheel is the label.
Wheel, right.
Yeah, it's a Japanese label. So there's 4 or 5 of them with Steve Gadd on drums and Eddie... well, this actually is Charnette Moffett on this one, but most of them have Eddie Gomez. And then they did 4 or 5 also with John Patitucci and Dave Weckl. Now, these are all really nice. And this was actually, I heard this in high school. And this is one of the first records where I became aware of the beauty of the ride cymbal beat. Because Gadd plays, on a lot of these tunes, he plays very simply and just plays sometimes just quarter notes on the ride cymbal. And I remember just being blown away by how swinging it was and how much forward motion and intensity and excitement he could generate by just playing quarter notes on the ride cymbal in the right way. So this was, this and some of the other ones were really influential records to me as well. Another drummer in the fusion realm that we got to talk about is Danny Gottlieb. A lot of great Pat Metheny recordings. From as far as the 80s, I love Travels, which is a live record, sort of live set, double LP recorded in various gigs in 1982, I believe, on their 82 tour. Danny is such a versatile drummer and such a great technician, great groove, great guy too. When he was in New York, he hasn't been in New York for years, but he worked so much. He's just somebody that everybody wanted to have him on their tour or on their record because he's such a versatile and great player and such a nice guy too. And speaking of Pat, there's actually no drums on this record. So it's not a drumming record, but I love this record. It's essentially a duo record, Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays, As Falls Wichita, So Falls Wichita Falls. There's drum machine and, a lot of overdubs and things on this, but it's, and Nana Vasconcelos actually plays percussion, so I guess that counts as a drummer record. But it's a beautiful record, really, really lovely, kind of ECM-y, but kind of in the Pat world, his own sort of sound, so that's a cool one to check out. One final record. So anybody who knows me knows that, sorry, the records are falling over, knows that I'm a huge fan of Rush and of Neil Peart, right? We've talked about my love for Neil before, and I've done lots of videos on him. This is an interesting record. It is essentially a fusion record. It's under Jeff Berlin's name, the fusion bass player, and it's produced by Ronnie Montrose. This was done around 86, I believe, or 85. And believe it or not, Neil Peart guests on 2 tunes on this. There is a tune called Marabi, which he plays double drums with Steve Smith. But then there's a tune called Champion, which is the title track. It's the last track on side 2, where Neil is the only drummer. And it's really interesting to hear him outside of Rush, playing with very different kinds of musicians. What's interesting about this recording session, about Neil's experience on this, I have a recording of a clinic that Neil did in the 80s, and he talked about making this record, and he had flown to San Francisco to do it, and they had decided they were going to rent drums out there, but he was going to take his own snare drum and his own cymbals and everything. And none of the stuff that they brought made it. Like, everything got lost by the airlines. So he had to, figure out like what drums to use. He had to find snare drum. He had to find cymbals that would work for him. And this was all in like Saturday night, so there were no drum shops open. So he kind of had to just use whatever they could find. And the drums they'd arranged for didn't show up, or there's some issues. So he used sort of a combination of just random drums that were sitting around the studio. And I'll tell you what, I've been listening to this for years. I would have thought Neil was using all his own gear, all his regular big drum set, because it sounds exactly like him, So it's all, touch and concept and everything. It doesn't matter so much what drums you're playing, because it still sounds 100% like Neil. So I just recently got I had this on cassette for ages. I just recently got a LP copy of this year, so that was fun to find.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, thank you for taking the time to do this and your very in-depth
glad to, man.
overview of all these records, man.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. We'll find something else to talk about later.
I'm sure we will.
Okay.